Press.
So we're at the beginning of Mem Zayin Amid Aleph. The Gemara is trying to figure out, the Gemara is going to have a discussion in today's daf of when the Shtei HaLechem become Kaddish. The Shtei HaLechem are purchased, the Shtei HaLechem are purchased with holy funds. So they already start off as Kedushas Damim. They have monetary holiness, but at some point they become physical holiness, that it could be eaten by the Kehanim. Now generally, Kedushas HaGuf takes place when you put it into a klisharis, but not by Shtei HaLechem. Shtei HaLechem go through a different process. At some point, the Shtei HaLechem become Kaddish. And the question is, when do they become Kaddish? Why am I getting all these things? When do they become Kaddish? So, the Gemara says like this. The Shtei HaLechem become Kaddish when you shecht the Kivsei Atzeres. When you shech the two kvasim, that's when the Shtei HaLechem become holy. Therefore, because the holiness is contingent on the shechita has to be done properly. It says the Gemara, Keitzad, therefore, shachtan lishman v'zarkan daman lishman. If you did the shechita and the zrika lishman, so you did it properly, then the kedusha goes into effect. Kiddush halechem, then the bread is sanctified and the Kohen could eat it. Now, opposite extreme, shachtan shaloi lishman v'zark daman shaloi lishman. If the kvasim were not prepared at all properly, they were not shechted properly, they didn't do the zrika properly, completely messed up from beginning to end, so then the bread is not kaddish. So then says the Gemara, Lo kiddush halechem. Now the question is, shachtan lishman v'zarek daman shaloi lishman. The question is, what if you shech the two kvasim properly, but you don't do the zrika properly? Is the shechita enough to create kedusha, or do you need the shechita and the zrika? So says the Gemara, Rebbe's opinion is, halechem kaddish ve'ena kaddish. It's holy and not holy. We'll have to define what that means, kaddish and not kaddish. It's kaddish ve'ena kaddish. Divrei Rabbi, Rav Elazar bar Shimon Omer, lo'olam in a kaddish, asher yichtan l'shman v'zirk dam l'shman. It says Rav Elazar bar Shimon, it's not kaddish at all. According to Rav Elazar bar Shimon, shchita alone is not enough to be mekadesh the Shtei HaLechem. You need shchita and zrika. Shchita alone, so it's not. So according to Rav Elazar bar Shimon, it is clearly not kaddish. It is Kedushas Damim only, not Kedushas Aguf. Rabbi says Kaddish ve'ena Kaddish. So the question is whether the Shechita does that. Rav Eliezer Rabbi Shimon says no. Rabbi says Kaddish ve'ena Kaddish, which we'll define in a minute what that means. Now says the Gemara, my time with the Rabbi, why does Rabbi believe the Shechita accomplishes something? As we'll see, Kaddish ve'ena Kaddish we'll have to define, but it does something. According to Rabbi Shimon, the Shechita does not do anything. You need the Zrika as well. So what's Rebbe's source that the shechita is mekadesh the Shtei HaLechem? Because while we don't have a pasuk by the Shtei HaLechem, we find by the Nazir. The Nazir also had an animal and it had bread. And what does it say? Es ha'ayil yaseh zevach shlamim laHashem al salachatas. Zevach is shechita. So it says es ha'ayil yaseh zevach, when you shech the ayil laHashem al salamatzis, then it's mekadesh the bread. So you see the shechita alone is mekadesh bread. Says the Gemara, remember the shechita mekadesh. That's Rebbe's take. Now Rav Elazar bar Shimon says shechita alone is not mekadesh. You need the zrika as well. So what does he do with this pasuk? Rav Elazar bar Shimon, he says you're looking at the wrong word. You're looking at zevach shechita. Look at the word before yaseh. Yaseh means that it has to be entirely done lishman. Yaseh, achi yaseh kosi yoisai. It's not enough to do shechita. You have to do zrika as well. I Rebbe nami yaksiv yaseh. What does Rebbe do with the word yaseh, which implies not just shechita? So he says like this: if it would have said zevach yaseh k'dekamrit, if the order of the pasuk was zevach shechita, then yaseh, I would say you're right. You have to do zevach the shechita and yaseh and the zrika. That would be the order. But that's not what the pasuk says. It says yaseh zevach. So you know what the pasuk means? Yaseh, you want to make it holy. How? Zevach, through shechita alone. Hashid d'chsiv yaseh zevach kama yaseh b'zvicha. Rav Elazar bar Shimon haksiv zevach. According to Rav Elazar bar Shimon, what does he do with the word zevach, which implies shechita alone is mekadesh it? How mebayla the kid Rav Yechanan? He used that for Rav Yechanan's teaching. The Amar Rav Yechanan hakol moedim shetzar she'elechem b'shas shechita. Zevach doesn't mean that you need the shechita b'mekadesh it. It means the bread has to be in existence b'shas shechita. What do I mean? Let's say you have a baker who at the time of the shechita, he doesn't have any bread. And then between the shechita and the zrika, he makes a loaf of bread. The halach is it's not kaddish. The shechita alone is not mekadesh it, but zevach, it has to be in existence b'shas shechita. Okay, good. So now what we have over here, just to review, it's the victory sip, because I'm nauseous. All right. Anyway, how we doing? So the kids are like this. You shech the carbon. The question is, what does the shechita do for the shtei alechem? Because the shechita was done properly, but the zrika was not. So according to Rabbi Shimon, 0. It is kedushas damim only. It is monetary holiness, no physical holiness. What did Rabbi say? Kaddish ve'ene kaddish. Kaddish ve'ene kaddish. Touch it but don't touch it. Kaddish ve'ene kaddish. What does kaddish ve'ene kaddish mean? So my kaddish ve'ene kaddish says two takes. Abaya and Rava. Abaya says kaddish ve'ene gomer. I think Abaya says what we would say. Kaddish ve'ene kaddish is 50% kedusha, meaning it's 50% kedusha saguf, but 50% kedusha damim. Meaning, what does the shechita accomplish? It accomplishes 50%. So according to Abaya, if you shecht the kvasim properly, but you don't do the zrika properly, you know what this bread is? It's 50% kedusha saguf, 50% kedusha damim. It's chatzi. Okay. Now we'll have to figure out what does that mean, because chatzi, you can't eat it, right? You can't eat it because it's 50%. 50% is not 100%. So according to Abaya, it's 50% kedushas damim, 50% kedushas aguf. Rava says no. Kiddush ve'ein niter. Rava says no. You're mistaken. It's 100% kedushas aguf, but you're not allowed to eat it. So when it says kaddish ve'ein kaddish, it's 100% holy. Kedushas aguf, but you can't eat it because the process wasn't done fully properly. There's no heter achila, but it's. I'm not sure exactly the method. No, it's just, I guess, in order to have a heter achila, you need the entire process to be done, but it's infused with physical holiness. So, by the way, so just to review, according to Rav Shimon, no holiness at all, meaning no physical holiness, just monetary holiness. Abaye and Rava argue, what would Rabbi say? According to Abaye, it's 50% kedusha saguf, and Rava would say it's 100% kedusha saguf. So here's the Gemara's kasha. My benai, what's the difference? Abaya says it's 50% kedusha saguf. Rabbi says it's 100% kedusha saguf. You can't eat it. Let me ask you a question. According to both opinions, can you eat it? No. What's the difference? So what do I care whether like you do a kedusha's X-ray, you do like a CAT scan of kedusha, and Rava would say it's 100% holy kedusha saguf, and Abaya would say it's 50% kedusha saguf. So now who cares? So then who cares? There's no practical. What's the practical halachic difference whether it's 50% kedusha saguf, 100% kedusha saguf? What's the difference? Can't eat it anyway. So what's the difference? So says the Gemara, my benayu. So iki benayu lemitvas pidyoina. Now Rashi changes the girsa. I'm going to go with the girsa change. Rashi flips the names. Not flips the names. Takes out the word loy. Abaya tofis pidyoina. L'rava loy tofis pidyoina. Art Scroll changes it as well, but in the original Gemara it's not like that. You know what the nafkamina is? What if you try to transfer the holiness to cash? Here's the rule. If something at Kedusha Saguf, you can't transfer it to cash. It doesn't work. If I have a regular carbon that's perfectly healthy, Kedusha Saguf in oila, and I say the holiness from this animal goes to the cash, it doesn't work. But if it's Kedushas Damim, you could. If you want to transfer the holiness from item A to money, if it's Kedushas Saguf, it won't work. If it's Kedushas Damim, it will work. So back to the question. We said, what's the difference between Abai and Rava, whether according to Rabbi, this shtei alechem is 50% kedushas guf, 50% kedushas dam, or 100% kedushas guf? What's the difference? I'll tell you what. Can you transfer the holiness onto cash? According to Rav, it's 100% kedushas guf. No. According to Abai, it's 50% kedushas dam, 50% kedushas guf. 50% can be transferred to cash. And what does that mean? It means that cash is partially holy according to Abai. That's an afkamina. Okay, good. Now the Gemara has one more point though. Bishloim el Rava, hainu dika bein Rabbi le Rav Elazar of Shimon. El Abaya ma'ika bein Rabbi le Rav Elazar of Shimon. Gemara says another kasha. Okay. Just to review, according to Rav Elazar of Shimon, it's 0 kedushas guf, only kedushas dam, 100% kedushas dam, money, holiness only. That's according to Rav Elazar of Shimon. What does Rabbi say? So it's machlokes. According to Rav, it's 100% kedushas guf, and according to Abai, it's 50-50. Why is it like this? According to Rav, it makes sense. There's a huge nafkamina between Rabbi and Rav Elazar of Shimon. According to Rav Elazar of Shimon, it's 100% kedushas guf, kedushas damim, 100% monetary holiness. According to Rabbi, it's 100% kedushas guf. I get there's huge differences. But according to Abaya, that is 50-50. So Rav Elazar Shimon holds it's 100% Kedusha Damim. Abaya holds, according to Rabbi, it's 50-50. What's the difference? So you're going to say transfer onto cash? They both could transfer onto cash. Meaning, what's the nafka between Rabbi and Rav Elazar Shimon according to Abaya? So it says the Gemara. Yeah, but what does it matter? You're right. That is the difference in a Kedusha CAT scan. That's what would come up. But like, who cares practically? So what are you going to tell me? What's the difference if something is 100% Kedushas Damim or 50-50? What's an nafkamina? So I'll tell you the difference. If you take it out of the Azara, A carbon that has Kedushas Guf cannot be removed from the Azara, and if it does, it becomes disqualified. Kedushas Damim can be taken out of the Azara. So according to Rav Elazar Bar Shimon, it's 100% Kedushas Damim, it can be taken out of the Azara. According to Rabbi, it's 50-50, it cannot be taken out of the Azara. Very good. Okay. What we're going to be doing, let me just explain. The Gemara is going to have a kasha. We'll just read it inside. You'll see it as I do it. Okay, so we had a shaila, if you shecht it properly, but you don't do the zrika properly, what is the status of the shtei alechem? According to Rav Elazar Bar Shimon, monetary holiness only, can't eat it. According to Rabbi, it's a machlekes whether it's 50% kedushas aguf, 100% kedushas aguf, but you can't eat it. So right now, if I were to ask you, I shechted the kvasim properly, but I did not do the zrika properly, can I eat the shtei alechem? The answer is no. According to Rav Shimon, no. According to Rabbi, no. Both according to Abai and Rava, no. No one agrees you could eat it. We said there's an afkamina if you want to transfer the holiness onto cash. Okay, fine. But you cannot eat the shtei alechem if the zrika was not done properly, according to everybody as of now. So says the Gemara, Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak asked the following question to Rav Chia bar Abba. Kivsei atzeres, these kvasim of Shavuos that are brought with the shtei alechem, Sheshachtan l'shmam v'zardam shloi l'shmam. Mamashar case. I shechted it properly, but I did not do the zrika properly. Can I eat it? So it's a strange question, because we just got finished saying no. According to everybody, no. So says the Gemara, Aliba Deman. Well, who are you asking according to? Aliba de Rav Elazar Bar Shimon, Ha'amar zrika in the Mekacha. According to Rav Shimon, no. And Aliba de Rabbi, Bein Labaya Bein Larava Kadosh and Nitzeru. And according to Rabbi, both according to Abaya and Rava, no. So the question is, who are you asking? You're asking, if I shechted properly, but I did not do the zrika properly, can I eat the shtei alechem? And so what's the shaila? No. It's a no across the board. So what is the shaila? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you the shaila. Aliba the haitana. So let me say this outside, what we're going to do, because it's one thought for most of the rest of the daf. We have a machlokes between Rav Akiva and Rav Eliezer. Okay? It's an ambiguous machlokes. We're not 100% sure what the case is, but it seems to be the machlokes is as follows: you shech the kvasim. I'm just going to say it all outside. Yeah, this is the point. It's a little bit tricky. You shech the kvasim, and then the shtei alechem are taken out of the azara. Then, they're taken out of the azara. Then I do the zrika with pigul thoughts. Okay? So the question is, so I shechted it properly, took the bread out of the azara, which I should not have done, then I did the zrika with pigul thoughts. There's a machlokes, Rav Akiva and Rav Eliezer, does the bread become pigul? According to Rav Akiva, yes. What does that show you? And this is the Gemara's idea. That shows you that the zrika, sort of, even when the bread was taken out, even when something went wrong, the bread is considered part of the carbon, and the zrika accomplishes something in order to create pigul. The question is, when Rav Akiva said that it accomplishes something to create pigul, would he also say that in our discussion, when I shechted properly, but I did the zrika shaloi lishma, so I also did it wrong, would that accomplish something that I could eat the shtei alechem? Or, when he said that it creates pigul thoughts, he was being machmer. Not that the zrika actually accomplishes something. You see, in our situation, if the zrika accomplishes something, it actually allows you to eat it. So it creates a leniency. Over there, it creates a stringency. So the question is he confident that it accomplishes something? In which case, over there, it creates a chumrah, but over here, it creates a kula. Or no, he's not confident. Over there, he's being machmer, but over here, he's not going to be machmer. That's the shaila, because we assume the case is where I shechted it properly, and then I took the shtei alechem out of the azara, and we assume, again, we'll fill in all the blanks, and that's the discussion. What would Rav Akiva say in our discussion? Okay. Gemara says like this. Aliba da'itana. What we're questioning is, what would Rav Akiva say in our discussion? Detani avua de Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba. Shtei halechem sheyatzu be'shchita la'azara. You shech the carbon, then you take the shtei alechem out of the azara, and then he did the zrika. That's pashas the case. But you did the zrika of pigul. You did pigul thoughts. So the question is there pigul, is the chiv kares, is the pigul take effect on the bread? Rav Eliezer Eimer ein belechem shum pigul. there is no pigul on the bread, and Rav Akiva Omer, yesh belechem mishnem pigul. But Rav Akiva says there is pigul on the bread itself. So it's a machlokes, Rav Akiva and Rav Eliezer. What's the machlokes about? So the machlokes is as follows. The machlokes is, Amr Rav Sheshes says, let me explain the machlokes. Tani Tanoi Kerebi Sirle. Hani Tanoi Kerebi Sirle. Both Rav Akiva and Rav Eliezer hold. Again, we had a discussion. Does the shchita mekadesh the shtei alechem or not? Now, if you hold that the shchita is mekadesh, that means that when you took the bread out of the azara, they were already holy. So l'chora, they should be disqualified. So why is it that according to Rabbi, the pigul thoughts affects the bread? So it says the Gemara, they both agree like Rabbi Damer Ein Zrika Mel. I'm sorry. Shchita mekadsha. They both agree that the shchita is mekadesh the bread, and therefore the bread is taken out of the azara. It should really be disqualified. So why is it that according to Rabbi Akiva, is there pigul thoughts affecting the bread? Mi Rav Eliezer tamei damer ein zrika me'elis liyaitzi. Rav Akiva tamei zrika me'elis liyaitzi. Go to the next page. The machlokes Rav Akiva and Rav Eliezer is if I have a carbon that part of the meat is taken out of the azara, does the zrika inside affect the part that's outside? Meaning the shtei alechem are already holy because the shchita was mekadesh. So when I take it out, l'chora, it should be disqualified entirely, and the zrika should have no effect on it. Rav Akiva's shita is that zrika is ma'elis liyaitzi. The zrika will change something for part of the carbon that was taken out of the azara. The shtei alechem was removed. Therefore, the zrika inside with pigul thoughts will create pigul on the shtei alechem. So says the Gemara, Ditnan. Now, before we finish up the thoughts, we just have to say it's a machlokes whether zrika helps for a part of the carbon that is taken out of the azara b'shas zrika. Ditnan. A muri kachikalim shiyatzl fnei zrikas damim. Rav Eliezer Omer ein moilin behem ein chayv mishum pigul noiser v'tamei. If part of the carbon was taken out of the azara before the zrika will not affect pigul noiser and tamei. Rav Akiva Omer moilin behem v'chayv mishum pigul noiser tamei. Rav Akiva says that it does. So Rav Akiva and Rav Eliezer are arguing whether the zrika affects things that are taken out of the azara. So too over here. So what we basically have over here is like this. According to Rav Akiva, I have bread that's already holy. Then I take it out of the azara. The zrika still accomplishes something for the bread. Now the chiddush is the bread is not a part of the carbon physically, but it's an extension of the carbon. So the same way Rav Akiva would say that if part of the carbon was out of the azara, the zrika affects it. So to over here, the zrika affects pigul to the bread. So the question is, what would he say if instead
what does it mean affects?
It's pigul now? It means if you eat the bread, you chayv kares. It's pigul. You'll be also chayv kares now. That's a lav. This is kares. So the Gemara says, so you see that according to Rav Akiva, the pigul actually affects that if the bread is outside, it now has, the zrika affects that the bread outside now has pigul. So what would he say in our discussion? Again, the case is over here, I shechted it properly, but I did the zrika shaloi l'shman. The question is, does the zrika shaloi l'shman affect the bread that I could eat the bread? Or do you say no? If it's not the shaloi l'shman, the bread is already excluded. So if Rav Akiva says, the same way Rav Akiva says, that the zrika, which is done improperly, affects the bread, that it creates pigul, so l'chora, he should say the same thing, that the zrika shaloi l'shman affects the bread, that you could eat it. At least there's a zrika. Or do you say no? Over there, he's being machmer that maybe the zrika affects it. But over here, he's not going to be lenient that you could eat it as well. That's the shaila. What would Rav Akiva say in our discussion? The Gemara says, "Mai midazrika pigul kavel lechem bepigul beyoytze." Does Rav Akiva, the fact that Rav Akiva says that for the part of the carbon that are outside of the azara, that the zrika affects pigul kibasar, that he looks at the shtei lechem as an extension of the carbon, that the zrika, for the same way Rav Akiva holds that if part of the carbon is out of the azara, the zrika affects it. So too over here, if the shtei lechem is out of the azara, the zrika creates pigul. Zrika shaloi l'shman nami shari l'lechem. So he should say that the same way the zrika creates pigul, it affects that. So too over here, it should affect that shaloi l'shman should affect that you could be matir to eat the bread. Or perhaps he's only being machmer and he's not being mekel. But the question is, you're right, because over there he's not talking about the discussion. But the same way he said that the zrika affects it for pigul, so in our discussion where you're dealing not with the bread leaving, but a zrika shaloi l'shman, maybe a zrika shaloi l'shman should be matir the lechem. So the Gemara doesn't end up answering this question. The Gemara just says, you're assuming what? Well, you're making a presumption. The presumption is that the machlokes Rav Eliezer and Rav Akiva. Again, the case is that we're trying to use this for our discussion. The case over there is you shechted it properly. you brought the shtei alechem out of the azara, then you did a zrikas pigul. The shaila is whether the bread has pigul or not. We assume the case is that you shechted it properly, took the bread out of the azara. While the bread is out of the azara, you did zrika. Gemara says maybe that's not the case at all. They both agree that the shechita is mekadesh it like Rabbi, and the machlokes is whether the zrika under such a situation makes an effect. And that's why we had a discussion, tried to pull it to our discussion as well. The Gemara just says, we'll do this fairly quickly, it's a little bit tricky. The Gemara says, maybe that's not what the shaila is at all. Maybe the shaila is, the case is not where it was outside of the azara b'shas zrika when you had the pickle thoughts, but rather, you shechted properly, took the bread out, then brought it back in, and then did zrika with pigul thoughts. Meaning, if it was out of the azara b'shas zrika, maybe everyone agrees that the zrika doesn't affect it. Because Rabbi Akiva does not look at the bread as an extension of the carbon akadekach. So what's the machlokes? The machlokes is where it was taken out and then brought back in. You say it was taken out, brought back in, it should be puzzle. That's assuming that the shechit is mekadesh it. Meaning, maybe the machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer is not that they both agree the shechit is mekadesh and it's related to our discussion. Maybe this goof is the machlokes. Do they say the shechit is mekadesh? If the shechit is mekadesh, then by taking it out and bringing it back in, it's already puzzle, and the zrika won't help. That's Rabbi Eliezer's take. Rabbi Akiva says no. The shechit is not mekadesh it. Therefore, by bringing it out, bring it back in, it doesn't affect anything. It's not holy yet, and it has nothing to do with our discussion. So says the Gemara, Maskler Rav Papa is maybe how do you know they argue the case where the bread was taken out of the azara b'shas zrika? And it has to do with whether we look at the bread as an extension, and it could be related to our discussion because they both agree with Rabbi that the shechit is mekadesh. Dilma b'deisnuhu abroid kuliyam lepligadein zrika me'el sliyoytzi. Perhaps if the bread is outside b'shas zrika, everyone agrees it will not take effect. Ubahadar aylini pligi. The machlokes is where I took it out and then brought it back in. And what's the machlokes? The machlokes is whether the shechit is mekadesh. If you hold the shechit is mekadesh, that means when you took it out, it was already holy. Is disqualified. Too late. Bringing back in won't help. Rabbi Akiva holds no. The shechit is not mekadesh it, but it has not to do. It will not be able to be applied to our discussion. The Gemara says, "The Rabbi Eliezer savala karebi da shechita mekadsha v'ivsel b'yotzi." Rabbi Akiva karev Elazar Rav Shimon da amar shechita loy mekadsha v'loy misel b'yotzi. So perhaps that's the discussion. So the Gemara just rejects it. The Gemara says, "No. What do you want to say?" Again, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer argue in a situation where you shechted properly, but then you did zrika, it was taken out, and then you had pigul thoughts. Two options. Either it was outside b'shas zrika, they both agree the shechit is mekadesh it, and the machlokes is whether in such a situation the zrika still takes effect. The zrika affects for karbanos that are out of the azara. Or no. The cases where it was taken out and then brought back in b'shas zrika. So it was in b'shas zrika, and the machlokes is whether the shechit is mekadesh. The Gemara just says, it can't be that pshat. I'll tell you why. Let's assume the Gemara says, Hi Mai, it can't be. Why? I amre b'shlemer Rav Akiva karebi svila dam shchita mekatchalu. How did it come Rav Akiva the katchalu b'shchita? Va'isi zrika kavala pigel. Eli amre Rav Elazar of Shimon svila dam zrika loy mekatsha zrikas pigel mi mekatsha. Again, today's daf is a little bit tricky. You have to just do your best. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why it can't be this pshat. If you tell me that Rav Akiva holds that the shechita is not mekadesh it, so what is mekadesh it? The zrika? So in this situation, what's the case? I shechted properly, but again, according to Rav Akiva, there's a possibility he doesn't care about the shechita. I take the shtei lechem out, bring it back in. But it's fine because it's not kaddish yet. Then when does it become kaddish? B'shas zrika. But the zrika was pigul. A zrika's pigul could definitely not be mekadesh it. So if you hold that Rav Akiva holds that the shechit is mekadesh it, fine. But if you're telling me no, shechit is not mekadesh it, so what is mekadesh it? The zrika? But the zrika was a zrika shloi l'shman. It was a zrika's pigul. Zrika's pigul can't infuse kedusha. If you need the zrika to create kedusha, zrika's pigul can't create kedusha. How do I know that zrika's pigul cannot create kedusha? The Gemara says, "Amar Rav Gidol," because didn't Rav Gidol Marav say, "Zrika's pigul ein mavil de meila, ve'ein ma'itzi de meila, ein mavil de meila be'emir kachikalim, ein ma'itzi de meila be'baser kachikachim." That Rav Gidol Marav said that Zrika's pigul cannot create kedusha. So if you tell me that Rav Akiva holds that the shechit is mekadesh in the cases where it's outside b'shas hazara, that's option one, fine. But you tell me no. He really holds that if it's outside, it's possible. His sheet is that the shechit is not mekadesh. The shechit is not mekadesh. So what is mekadesh? It's Zrika, but it's a Zrika's pigul. Zrika's pigul won't create kedusha, like Rav Gidol Marav says. The Gemara says no. Lav itusiv de Rav Gidol Marav. The Gemara Meila tells us that Rav Gidol Marav was already rejected. So because the sheet was rejected, it is still an option on the table. The Gemara just basically ends that discussion without any real basic conclusion. One last shaila, and we'll end with this. Ba'imine Rav Yirmiyah and Rav Zera. Kivsei atzeres sheshachtan lishman. Okay, here's the case. It's an interesting situation. It's a clever. You don't have to know what we did before. This is a new topic. Just focus for a couple minutes. The Gemara says, I shechted the kvasim properly. Good. Then I lost the bread. Uh-oh. So here's the question. What are my choices? I have two choices here. I could do the zrika properly, and then I have a problem. Because you have the kvasim without the bread is an issue. Or I could purposely do the zrika thinking that it's shlamim. What's the halacha when you do zrika shaloi l'shman? It's kosher, but you're not yotza, which, we learned yesterday, will convert it to a shlamim. Right? We said yesterday that it could be turned into a shlamim. I shecht properly, and I lose the bread. I have two choices. I could continue to do things properly, but I have no bread, so I won't be able to eat the carbon. Or I could purposely do the zrika thinking it's a shlamim, which will convert it into a shlamim. A shlamim doesn't need bread. So can I purposely mess it up in order to actually be able to eat the carbon? So if I do it properly, I'm messed up. But if I do it improperly, I found a technical loophole. Because it only needs bread if it's the kivsei atzeres. If I think shaloi l'shman, it just turns into a random shlom which doesn't need bread. So can I do it? If I do it properly, it's a problem. If I do it improperly, it technically works. So is there an option? Would the psak be lichachila? I could mess up in order to find that loophole. So says the Gemara, kivsei atzeres sheshachtan l'shman v'avad alechem, ma'u shehizek dam shaloi l'shman lahatir basar b'achila. Amar lei. So the response that Rav Yirmiyah Rav Zera said, Yesh lach davar she'ein kosher l'shmai v'kosher shaloi l'shmai. Where do we find the concept in halacha that if it's done properly, it's a problem, but if it's done improperly, you're good to go? Where do we find such a thing? How could this be? It can't be. It can't be that the psak is, if it's done properly, it's a problem, but if it's done improperly, you're good to go. Where do we find such a thing? So says the Gemara, whoa, what do you mean? V'loi hari pesach koidim chatzos, de'ina kosher l'shmai v'kosher l'shmai. What about Karm Pesach? If I bring the Karm Pesach today, right? Today, in middle of Adar, and I shecht it thinking it's a Karm Pesach, so I do things properly, it's a problem, because it's not Pesach. But if I think Shlomim, it works. So you told me, where do we find a situation where if you do it properly, it's a problem, but improperly, it's okay? Every Karban Pesach, not on Pesach. By the way, forget about Adar, that's a little bit extreme. Erev Pesach before Chatzos. If I think Karban Pesach, it's a problem. If I think the wrong thoughts, it works. So you see, it's a viable situation. So it says the Gemara, Hachi Kamina. No, Rav Yirmiyah Rav Zera said, no, this is what I meant to say. Yeshach davar shenira l'shmai v'nidcha l'shmai v'eina kasher l'shmai v'kasher shaloi l'shmai. Have you ever had situations where you started something properly? I'm not talking about Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach, you never started it properly. It's not like you did the shechita thinking it's a Karm Pesach, then you change it. Over here, I shechted it with the machshava, the right machshava, and I want to change in middle. Where do we find a situation where changing in middle accomplishes that? Where if I think properly the second half, it's a problem. But if I think improperly the second half, it works. Where do we find such a thing? Says the Gemara, V'loi hari Pesach achar zmana b'shayim mois hashana. What about a Karm Pesach throughout the year after Pesach? So it was fit to be offered on Pesach, and then it became not fit. So over here also, it was fit in the beginning, and then it became not fit. So it's the same situation. Says the Gemara, no. Hachi kamina. What I mean to say is like this: Yeshlach davar shenir l'shmai v'nishchat l'shmai v'nidcha l'shmai v'nekasher l'shmai v'kasher l'shmai. No, what I meant is what I said before. Not that it was fit at some point. Where do we find a carbon that the first stage is done properly, then the second stage it's better to mess up? Where do we find that? That I don't know. So says the Gemara, v'loi hari toida. What about the carbon toida? You have a carbon toida, you shecht l'shma, thinking it's a taida, and then you lose some of the bread. What did we do yesterday? We said, if you think taida, it's a problem. If you think shlomim, it works. So you see there's a situation where you started l'shma, and then the second half, it's better to mess up than to actually do it properly. Says the Gemara, no, that's not a raya. Shani taida rachmane karya shlomim. That's different. The Torah specifically calls a Taida a Shlamim. Therefore, changing it to Shlamim is not a big mess up. But if you have over here, where Kivsei Atzeres is not meant to be a regular Shlamim, to change it, to change it improperly, where do we find a situation where if you do it properly, it's a problem, and improperly is okay? We don't find such a thing. Taida is different. Changing it to a Shlamim is not such a b'di'evet, it's not such a mess up, because the Torah calls it a Shlamim, therefore it's not something that could be applied to other cases. I will stop there.
Oh, yeah.